Serial Experiments Lain is a show I was well aware of for a long time before I actually watched it. I had come across the opening and was intrigued by its tone and the atmosphere of it, but it wasn't until a few years later that I would actually watch it. I don't think a piece of media has made me feel as much as Serial Experiments Lain has, and it's quite difficult to explain why. In this video, I want to explore how the show shows isolation and loneliness through the main character, Lain, as well as through its world, while also primarily focusing on technology in Lain and how events unfold in the show. Let's start with the opening. While lots of anime openings like to incorporate lots of characters and show off the main cast of the show, Lain instead focuses pretty much exclusively on the titular character, with her being in almost every shot of the opening. We get these shots of her walking around an empty city, with the only other living creatures visible being these crows. This shows how removed she is from everyone else, and how she feels she doesn't fit in with the world around her, and has therefore ceased to be a part of it. The crows here could represent the darkness and fear she has inside herself, and how these feelings are constantly stalking her. The shot of the birds flying away and leaving her could show how she has been abandoned by everyone around her, and been left on her own to fend for herself. In contrast to these shots of Lain by herself, we have these ones where she's trapped inside of a TV screen, while people around her fail to notice her. These people are doing various things such as making out, playing a game, and being at a party, while Lain is just trapped in this screen. I think this could symbolize how she isolates herself and stays away from people while they live and interact with one another. It also shows her inability to communicate with them. It's interesting to note that all these shots have more than one person in them, with lots of people at the party, the kid playing his game with his mum in the background, and the two people making out, while Lain is always shown on her own, except in these shots where she is on a screen. I think this further indicates how separated she is from others, and how isolated she is. It's important to mention the song used in the opening, which sets the tone of it. It's called Duvet by Boa, and it perfectly encapsulates some of the darker elements of the show, while being on the surface quite pleasant and nostalgic. I think the most important lines are, "And all the fears you hold so dear will turn to whisper in your ear," which shows all the fears and dark thoughts she has haunting her. Also the line, "I am falling, I am fading, I am drowning, help me to breathe. I am hurting, I have lost it all. I am losing, help me to breathe." This shows how suffocating life is for Lain, and the way in which she may feel everyone around her has deserted her. It could also show how she's almost fading from existence because of how separated from everyone else she is, and the inner desperation for someone to come along and save her. The line, "help me to breathe," could be seen as a cry for help inside her head, and a desire for her life to improve. There are a couple of random points I would like to mention before concluding this part. One of them is the typewriter typeface, which spells out her name in the opening, which is used as the font for the title of the show. Typewriters are an archaic piece of technology now, made obsolete by computers, and the use of this font is clearly commenting on technology and how rapidly it expands. Keep in mind the fact that the internet was only just becoming more popular as the show was being made, and was still mostly seen as a novelty by a lot of people. Technology comes and goes, and is repeatedly replaced by newer things. Everything will become obsolete eventually. Also, to go back to Lain appearing on the TV screens, this is our first hint of Lain's strange connection with technology and her abilities. On a much more minor note, take notice of the bear on Lane's hat, which is a recurring motif for a character in the show. The opening ends with Lain with a tired, pained look on her face, fading away into nothingness. This could be seen as her pain being too much to bear, and her no longer being able to deal with it, and simply fading from existence. Now that we've looked at the opening, we should move on to the first episode.
Why? Why won't you come? You really should come here.
Weird Layer 01.
The first episode of Lain opens on shots of a bustling city and these claustrophobic shots of lights. Right from the get-go, it feels uncomfortable and busy and starts to set the tone. We are introduced to a girl in a school uniform who is panting and out of breath. This girl is mocked by a couple of girls who giggle and say, this shows the way the world treats her and how little it values her. We then see a drunk man trying to have his way with a drunk woman. She playfully resists and tries to stop him. The way that the show depicts things such as sex and kissing is interesting to note, as it always seems to be lacking in any love and romantic virtue, and always seems animalistic and soulless. Love is something that is rarely seen in this anime, and everything that should be intimate instead feels hollow. While this is going on, the girl with glasses has ascended to the top of a building and takes off her glasses, holding them out over the building. This could be seen as her removing something that she may have been singled out for having to wear and knowing she will no longer need them. This could also be her believing to be seeing the truth of the world for the first time. Plastered across her face is a sincere smile. She believes she's going somewhere better. Text appears confirming this. I don't need to stay in a place like this. Then she jumps, crashing to the ground. Meanwhile, the man and the woman kiss each other, still oblivious to what has happened. The juxtaposition of a young girl taking her own life, with the two of them kissing each other, is clearly very deliberate. What hope does this girl have of a future? Is she just doomed to end up like this woman, getting drunk and sleeping with random men who only want her for her body? This also ties in with the soullessness of intimate interactions in Lain, and how the show seems to present it as something unpleasant and carnal. The two stop to stare at the dead girl, their faces blank and emotionless. Most of the voices of the people who seem to notice the incident, rather than seeming sympathetic or shocked, are quick to absolve themselves of blame, with one of them saying,
I don't know anything. We've got nothing to do with this.
although one voice does say,
Oh no!
I don't know.
This is horrible!
which gives the impression that some people may genuinely care, and that not everyone is totally unfeeling. The camera goes up to show the girl's bag left at the top of the building that she jumped from. Connected to it is a cute keyring. I feel like this detail of the keyring contrasts well with the darkness of what has happened, and goes to show that the girl had a life and a personality. She went to school and had feelings, interests, hobbies, desires, but not anymore. Power lines and distorted voices, the hum of electricity, red blotches and shadows, harsh sunlight. This is the environment in which our protagonist, Lain, is introduced. It paints a portrait of the outside world as being something scary and anxiety-inducing for her, and is a fitting way for us to meet our titular character. Text reads, "If you stay in a place like this, you might not be able to connect." This is a prevalent idea throughout Lain, the idea of not being able to connect with other people in the real world. The statement basically means, in the real world you may not be able to connect with others, but through the internet you can. Give up on the real world and join us. It's important to note how deserted the location is around Lain, making us feel as if these voices and uncomfortable aspects are something that Lain alone is dealing with. These voices with the shots of the power lines are also very likely the sound of people communicating through telephone calls and through the internet, also known as the wired in this universe. This contrasts with the lack of people around, with nobody talking outside of these wires. If there were other students or families around, there would be a sense of familiarity. However, none of this is present. It's just Lain alone in this peculiar environment. We transition to Lain staring out of a train window, watching the wires. The train is crowded, and instead of sitting down, Lain has chosen to stand by the window, away from other people. The distortion on the voices is still present, and so too is the hum of electricity.
It's so noisy. Can you just shut up? Huh?
Here Lain is clearly showing her discomfort and frustration with everyone else around her, and how she just wants silence and this feeling of uncomfortableness to go away. Not only the sounds in real life, but the sounds of the voices she can hear through the wires too. In fact, nobody may even be talking in the real world. It could just be through the wires, which would explain the passenger's confusion. It's interesting to see how much emotion Lain has in her voice during this moment, when she is so monotone throughout the rest of this episode and most of the show. Now Lain is at the school entrance. Students are everywhere, all heading towards the girls' school. Lain looks at the students ahead of her. They suddenly become distorted, turning into black shadows. It feels as if Lain is separate from them, and that she almost doesn't exist on the same plane of existence as them. Inside of the classroom, we hear crying. It's Julie, one of the people part of Lain's group of sort of friends. Arisu, or Alice as I will be referring to her as, comforts Julie, then goes over to talk to Lain. Alice asks if Lain has received an email, but she's not in the loop and has no idea what she's referring to. We find out that people have been receiving emails from the girl who jumped off the building, and that her name was Yamada Chisa, a student at Lain's school. Reika comes over and insults Lain by saying,
Baby Lain doesn't know computers.
it's apparent by this interaction and many more, where Lain is put down by Reika or Julie, that she isn't very well liked by them, and that she is an outlier with her quietness and doesn't quite fit in. Lain then says,
Poor Julie. Why's she crying? Because she got that awful email from Chisa. Oh, can't you put two and two together?
this line shows her empathy and also, more interestingly, her limited understanding of how others feel and her inability to be able to interpret emotions well. She is put down further by Reika, and we find out that the girl is in fact not crying because Chisa died, but because of the strange email she received from her and how it has scared her. This shows a lack of empathy for what happened to the girl, and how people like Julie only care about themselves, and how the death affects her, instead of the fact that the girl actually died. Reika talks about the death some more, and then class starts. On the whiteboard is programming code instead of Japanese. Apparently, according to one of the creators of the show, the smoke coming out of Lane's hand represents her mental illness. We can clearly see she needs help and to reach out to someone, yet she is unable to, and her illness is just festering away in her body. What's it like when you die? It really hurts. Lain goes home and finds no one else around. She goes to her room and we see that it is filled with stuffed animals and childish things. We can see that she is sentimental and innocent and hasn't become hardened or old yet. She is still yet to grow up, and for the time being, her room shows her to be a sweet young girl who hasn't yet been corrupted by technology. On her desk are more childish things. Interestingly, the keychain and the snowman are reminiscent of what Chisa had on her bag and shows the similarity between the two. Also on her desk is her Navi, which is turned away from her and obviously hasn't seen much use, if any. She puts on a cap with bear ears and sits down at her Navi. Lain has an email from Chisa, the girl who died. The girl talks to Lain through the computer and says how her body has moved consciousness and that she is now in the wired, which is essentially the internet. Chisa asks Lain if she remembers walking home with her one time, to which Lain replies with a yes. The fact that this event is significant enough for Chisa to remember it shows that Chisa was often on her own and that Lain was caring enough to spend at least a little time with her when no one else would. Chisa asks if Lain understands what she means about her consciousness having gone into the wired, to which Lain simply asks the question,
Why did you die?
which is just so childlike in its simplicity and innocence. Chisa ignores her question and continues to talk about the emails and how they are not a prank and is really her communicating with people after her death. Lain restates her question.
But why? Why did you die?
Here, there is a God.
Huh?
For Chisa, there was nothing good in the real world, no God or anything worth living for. She saw no reason to continue on in this world, and that's why she took her own life, in the hopes of finding a better world through death. Chisa could not function in society, so she ceased to be a part of it. It's a desperate and warped way to think. The TV buzzes. Lain, her sister, and her mother are all sitting at the dining table. This is the first we see of them, and this scene shows the family dynamic for Lain very well. Lain's sister finishes her dinner quickly and walks away, giving a simple excuse to her mother and not saying anything to Lain. There is quite a lot of distance here between the two, and they evidently aren't very close. Let's look at this interaction Lain has with her mother, which establishes their relationship.
Mom?
Yes?
I got an email from a friend today. It was from this girl I know who killed herself last week.
We can see how shy and nervous Lain is by the hesitation at the start of her sentence. We can also see that she wants to open up to her mother and talk about what's going on. However, her mother is very distant and doesn't care. She also expresses no concern when Lain says that she received an email from a friend who died and seems to be paying no attention to what Lain is saying. She lacks any motherly qualities, and it's clear Lain is unable to open up to her about how she feels because she seems to simply not care or have any concern about her whatsoever. Her father is also absent from the table and is not eating with them, which shows that all of Lain's family seem to be very distant and unsupportive of Lain and how she feels. We cut to nighttime with Lain in her room wearing a bear onesie. When Lain wears this onesie, she seems to be at her most innocent and childlike state. In later episodes, she stops wearing it, which seems to mark a transition in her personalities and a shift to a more adult-like Lain. But for now, she is still vulnerable and innocent. Lain goes to her dad and asks about possibly getting a new computer. This request seems to be prompted by Lain wanting to fit in with her friends, who are far more knowledgeable about technology than Lain is. Remember that one of them even mocked her about it. Her father mentions that Lain normally doesn't come to visit her, which shows their lack of connection. His sole interest seems to be in computers. Not once does he look at Lain during this entire conversation. The entire time he is on his computer.
Lain, you are in junior high now already. Your school chums must be leaving you in the technical dust. Huh? We should upgrade that old Navi. You know, Lain, in the real world, or the wired world, people are connected somehow. That's how societies are created. You should broaden your horizons. Make an effort to create friends. Take the initiative. Even a girl like you should be able to make friends right off the bat. You can live and communicate in both worlds. There's nothing to be afraid of.
The use of the phrase, even a girl like you, is just adding insult to injury and shows how unsupportive he really is. We also have here the idea that if Lain is unable to make friends in the real world, she can still make them in the digital one. An idea that is very relevant today with so much communication being through the internet. Keep in mind the series came out in 1998 when the internet was still gaining its popularity, and consider how incredibly relevant it still is today. Lain says she has a friend she wants to see, referring to Chisa, and that's why she wants a better Navi. The fact that Lain considers Chisa a friend, despite only hanging out with her once, is sweet, and the idea she wants to talk to her more shows how caring she can be. The next day, Lain is on the train once again, doing her daily routine to get to school, looking at the wires. The train suddenly stops, and we are informed that it is due to an accident. Lain looks out the window again, but this time there's a bright light and what looks like blood coming out of the wires. Clearly the train has hit someone. We abruptly transition to Lain in the middle of a crowded street, faceless people passing her by. Throughout this sequence we cycle through lots of locations in a dreamlike stupor. We have Lain at the bottom of these stairs with shadow-like people disappearing like at the school. Then it goes into this bizarre Dutch angle shot. Lain looks different here, more confident and less meek. An extreme long shot of Lain with nobody else around, totally alone like in the opening. A pan shot of Lain in her house, with what looks like a fisheye lens effect. Lain's face totally neutral, then a smile. Train lights, Lain's eye, wires, alone again on her street. Smoke engulfs her. The light again. Now she's on the tracks. A train is coming. A bell is ringing. A girl crosses over the barrier. She stands there waiting for the train, her hair covering her face. Lain yells at her, but her voice makes no noise, as if in a dream. As the train gets closer, she runs to get in front of it. Lain is pleading, but the girl can't hear her. We see her face. She's smiling and screaming at the same time. It cycles, eventually ending our smile. Then the train comes. So, what does this all mean? Well, it's very open to interpretation. Throughout the show, Lain is shown to have an abnormal connection to the wired. Here she could be seeing the death of the girl who held up the train by looking through the wires, as is evident by the shot of Lain's eye with the reflection of the wires in them. Just like how before she could hear the voices coming from them. This is why Lain is unable to speak in the sequence, because it is an event that has already happened, and she can't change it, only witness it by having entered the wired world. Something that is interesting to mention is that Chisa, before committing suicide, had a moment where her mouth moved, but no words came out. Lain has the same moment when confronting her dad. This could be seen as Lain having some kind of connection with Chisa, which allowed her to see what happened to her through the wires. It also shows a sort of powerlessness, which I find interesting, mouthing words but not being able to vocalize them. We go out of the sequence through a bright light, which reveals Lain in a classroom. Her pen has what looks like a bear's face on it, similar to her onesie. She's sweating profusely and is clutching her head. Instead of expressing concern, the teacher simply chastises her for not paying attention. Note that all of her classmates are completely in grey and are totally focused on their work, with Lain being the odd one out. Instead of programming code, this time on the blackboard, they are learning English. However, from Lain's perspective, it fades away and simply leaves the statement, "Come to the wired as soon as you can." This is first written in chalk, then appears to be written on a computer screen. We get even more shots of power lines as Lain walks home. This time the ground has purple splotches. As Lain walks, Chisa suddenly appears and the two pass by each other. Then just as abruptly, she disappears. Look at how suddenly this happens. It's instantaneous. Also, as she passes by her, we have the red splotches again, symbolizing her death. Chisa reappears, and I think it's worth analyzing this shot. All around her are the wires. in the far distance, and also right behind her. It's like she's trapped in them, constricted, and now only Lain is able to see her. The background is this bizarre, sickly yellow-green mist with white fog at the bottom. Her hair is tied back again, and she has her glasses, unlike how she looked when she died. She's back to the way she looked before, the way Lain remembers her. Her expression is a solemn one, and her eyes stare down at the ground, not making eye contact. Lain recognizes her, and confused, asks, "So where are you?" She smiles, and we get an extreme close-up of her eyes. They look sedated and dead. She fades away in a bright light, like the shadows from before. Clearly Lane's connection to the wired has allowed her to see Chisa. However, this other world isn't the paradise Chisa thought it was. This episode's title is Layer 01 Weird. I didn't get what the title meant. Is it an insult that would be said about Lain or Chisa? Then I realized that weird is an anagram of wired. The wired world is the most important aspect of the show, and something we will delve deeper into as the show progresses. Now it's time to talk about the outro. It's a lot more simplistic than the opening, as is generally the case for animes, especially around this time. We have a dark-haired Lain sleeping comfortably in the fetal position with a smile on her face. She is surrounded by machinery, and we slowly zoom out from her throughout the course of the outro. The outro hints at a major reveal, which happens later, and I will briefly take another look at it when this reveal happens.